welcome to the 5th Annual Guild of Music Supervisors State of Music in Media Conference.
Welcome everybody, my name is Larry Benjamin. I'm a re-recording mixer and I work for Famosa Group. And today I'm going to be moderating a panel that we're going to be talking about dub stage dynamics. And before I begin, let's go and introduce my colleagues to you guys, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we do and how we do it. We all work together on a show called Better Call Saul, but this exact same group did the forthcoming El Camino Breaking Bad movie, which is premiering October 11th. So I handle dialogue and music as a mixer, and I'm going to introduce you to Nick Forshager.
I'm the sound supervisor, so I do all the sound effects and dialogue and backgrounds and Foley and all that. So that's my overall job.
And then we have Jason Newman.
I'm the music editor. I bring the score and the songs and the source music to Larry to make sound great.
And here's our executive producer, Diane Mercer.
And yeah, I'm kind of the overlord of post-production for the whole entire thing. So this is part of my job, but I also deal with the editing and the color timing and visual effects, the whole thing. Yeah, but this is actually. It's my favorite part.
And of course, everybody probably knows Thomas Golubić.
Hi. Yeah, I'm the music supervisor on the show. I'm very thankful music supervisor on the show.
Excellent. So I'm going to briefly describe to you guys, and we'll have our panelists talk about each of their involvement in the steps. We're going to talk about the workflow of how we work. But before we get to that, dub stage dynamics is going to be a little bit different than just playing stems and showing you what we do. It's really, we're going to discuss kind of the softer skills, the interplay, the personalities, the hierarchy, all the relationship part of what we do on the stage. Because at our level, and I think at any level in broadcast, streaming, and feature films, well, there has to be a level of competence because we have to be very efficient, and time management is critical, and we'll get into that. But it's more about what makes it work efficiently. And we're very, very grateful. This particular group, we're going into season 5 of Better Call Saul. I'm fortunate enough to have been brought along on Better Call Saul. I was not part of the original Breaking Bad crew, but then this same group, we worked together on a show called Enlisted, and Diane was great, and became more about personalities, and they made a change to us to mix on Better Call Saul, and this has been the working rapport we've had. And when you work with someone over the course of seasons, you get a rapport, and having a rapport can't be underestimated because it's all about the relationship part of this, having a shorthand. So let's, to that end, talk about the workflow. What happens first? I believe the first part of this process is the spotting session. So once the show is cut and edited, these guys have a spotting session, and that's basically you sit down with Diane, you're there, Thomas, you're there, Jason, you're there, Nick is there, and then the picture editor and their assistant is there.
Yeah, I would actually say it starts a little earlier than that, as it starts in the offline.
Okay.
Because the assistant editors and the editors, especially on our show, are really, really involved with the sound design. So. And we do something really interesting on the show is we do not temp score. No temp music at all. We will do, if there's a song for a montage or something that's scripted, we will have it. But Vince and Peter, our showrunners, do not like to, they want the scenes to stand on their own. And then they want to get to the music at the point where the scenes are done, and we know this is the best we can do picture-wise and sound design-wise, and now what can music do to take it to the next level? So that all gets decided as we're working through the offline process, and then once we lock picture, then we have everyone come in and we have a 3-hour meeting to talk about 3 to 4 hours generally.
And that's not a joke. We are 3 to 4 hours for a 1-hour show.
For a 1-hour show.
It's the most detailed, specific, and I think creative experience that any of us have had. I think we feel all like such great contributors to creativity in that room.
Yeah.
And I just want to touch on something that Diane mentioned. It is very unique. Of all the shows I've ever mixed, I've never seen a show that does not temp with music. And it's fantastic because even the movie, when we did the movie, we saw the screening without music, without score. Certainly the songs and any montage pieces had music, but without score, you're not using it as a crutch to motivate a scene. It has to kind of stand on its own. So I think that's a very unique thing to this particular group.
Yeah, and that started back in like
Breaking
season 1, I think, of Breaking Bad, right?
So partly because of the naivete of AMC. Like, I don't think they knew how the process worked.
Yeah,
and
I think that's fair.
we convinced them to do it, and they foolishly let us, and we've been doing it ever since.
Yeah.
And actually, it started with Vince, too, because I remember when I went to the very first spotting meeting for Breaking Bad, I remember it was really sparse, the music, and I'm like, okay, well, we're going to add music here. And he's like, no, we're not doing it that way. And then it's like, okay, well, we're going to add music here. No, we're not doing it there. And so it ended up staying that he wanted it to always be sparse, and the music would have a very specific purpose for every episode. And so when he knew that networks were going to want music from beginning to end, and so to kind of hold them in their place, he decided they're going to look at the cut with no music, and then we'll make the decisions where they will be. So that's how I kind of started right from the get-go. So it was a conceptual idea, I think, that Vince had from the get-go.
It also helps with a lot of the notes that come from studios tend to be about music and not about the filmmaking, because it's easier to comment on music than it is about editorial choices. So
Everybody has an opinion on a song.
Yep.
Everybody thinks they have a song that might be better in your spot than what you have. So
it
And a lot of
dodges
times,
that
like
whole
on the
problem.
networks, you'll have middle management guys that don't really have a film background, so they'll know there's a problem with the scene, and so they don't know about pacing or timing or things like that. So then they say, well, just add music or change the music because that will change the timing of it. Where now they actually have to look at the cinematic, aspects of the show first before you get into the music aspects. So the music then takes on a different element of other than just driving a scene or trying to tell part of the story that the action or the dialogue or the script should be doing. So.
And it opens up the creativity, because then the composer has no guide, so he really needs to come up and talk in emotion with the EPs. So then it's really something out of his mind, and that can be completely different than what anybody else would have thought. So it becomes unique. And then Thomas, you get a wide breadth of figuring out, what style of song could actually work here, instead of being pigeonholed to something that they've been hearing for a month and they want this song because that's all they've heard.
And I think in many ways for music supervisors, if we're doing our job well, we're doing it a little bit like an actor does. An actor is going to think about different ways of interpreting a scene and different ways that the chemistry might operate with the other actors, all which might be valid to the situation. So we might lean in one direction or another direction, but the idea is to give options. And I'm frequently surprised by what gets selected, because it might be leaning on an angle that seemed like a weird idea, but it captures something emotional, or it captures something that is like coming off of what Nick is doing, or off of just sort of the sparseness of it. And Jason and his team are magical at finding ways of taking ideas that might seem counterintuitive, but making them flawless and feel like they're just natural. And so much of what we do is taking exceedingly complicated things and making them look effortless.
Well put. And to that end, how many selections would you say, alternatives for a song would you provide?
We try to be very careful. I think I always view it as like 5 is a nice magic number.
Yeah.
And with 5, I've got at least 3 different approaches with maybe a couple variations of it. I try to have as much breadth as possible with it. Also, we go through hundreds to get to those 5.
Sure.
So, and I luckily have a fantastic team, and we are all creatively engaged in that. And we all watch the scenes together, and we all review picture together. And in many ways, there's times when somebody might feel really passionately about something, and I don't totally get it. And I might be like, okay, I've got 4 really strong options. I don't know if this makes sense, but let me just put it in there because they feel really passionate, and they feel as a group passionate about it. I might be missing something. And then frequently that's the one that gets picked. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I would have vetoed that idea.
Right.
And that happens frequently.
Do you often have alternatives in your back pocket beyond those 5?
Ton.
Oh,
And we also, and Vince is always very aware of our, you want to describe that, Diane?
Well, yeah. I mean, he's always like, well, because you kind of place them in order.
We place them in a order. But
Yeah. There's an
they're
order
very
of
sequenced.
presentation.
Yeah. We always think, all right, the first one is probably going to be something that's a totally solid and really maybe like the straightforward idea that seems to hit all the bells. And then the second one might be one that is a different spin on something, or it might be the avant-garde idea to cleanse the palate. And then it's like, okay, they're idiot knuckleheads. I don't know what they were thinking with that one. And then the third one might very well be something that's kind of like, oh, but they're not totally stupid. Like there's another component there. Right. So it's very much about the sequencing and hoping that, and sometimes the one that we really love will bury somewhere, because I feel like Vince almost wants to discount the first 2 and
Sometimes,
Peter.
yes.
Yeah, so I'm just like, I think we're going to put the home run in number 4. And sometimes it makes it, and sometimes they're like, oh no, that was not a home run at all.
So during this spotting session, these guys will go over a discussion. They'll literally play down the project, play down the show, and discuss at length, it sounds like exhaustive length, each particular food group. So the dialogue will be discussed. Do we need an alternative here? Do we need to bring the actor in or actress in for looping? Same thing for sound effects. What do we want to build here? Do we want to do a sound design sequence? We want to take what you're hearing in the temp further. That's just as a guide. And these guys are fantastic. The filmmakers, the showrunners are great. They don't get so married to the temp. Sometimes this temp love, we've worked on shows together where that becomes more than the temp. It should almost stand for template, like what they want. But it's more of a guide here, and we kind of expound upon that. And Jason will, on the Breaking Bad movie, will temp in Dave Porter's score to use as a guide for him to what actually to score to. So
just a correction of that, because that was a very different process.
That was a different process.
Because we did the same thing we always do. We watched the movie all the way through with no music.
Right.
But when we were going to screen it for like the studio, we had to do a temp score pass because like they were not going to get it.
Right.
In a 2-hour movie, they were not going to get it. So Dave and Jason did work kind of offline together to kind of narrow down. We used all old Breaking Bad score, of course. And so you guys kind of narrowed down, I believe, the directions, right, that he was thinking he would go with certain scenes, right? You guys had a couple conversations.
We
at least,
basically
right?
did a spotting session
You
for
and Dave.
me, Dave, and
Well, yeah,
came
we
in with
did.
Vince,
We did
and
spot. Yeah,
it was
we
a
did. We
traditional
did
spot.
do it. Yeah, we did. We did our music spot, but it was also a temp score spot at the same
Right.
time. So we did discuss like, okay, like this one we definitely don't want to put any temp score in, but these we knew we do need to. So yeah, and then you guys kind of went off and worked on it a little bit, and then you came back with a bunch of stuff, and we spent a day, I think,
Right.
going through all of the options with Vince and listening to everything, and but Dave never listened to it.
Nope. He never
So
touched it.
and he did not use it as a guide. So
Well,
I just want to clarify
that's fine.
that.
In this situation, you're
Yeah.
right. It's more the exception. But Jason has worked on shows where part of his job is to actually, in
Yes.
his team, to temp in for the composer, either with their score or even a completely unrelated score. But you're right. This is a more
Yeah,
unique,
Dave does
more unique
not
show.
ever want to hear the temp score,
Yeah.
ever.
That's
Yeah,
very
well,
true.
the temp score allows the EPs and the composer to be able to talk on more of a equal footing, saying, I like the sound of this, I don't like the sound of this, this is the vibe I'm going for. And one of the beauties of Vince is he doesn't feel like he needs that at all. He feels like he can communicate with Dave, not in musical terms at all, but via emotion and story, and Dave gets it, and they have a great working relationship that way.
So this spotting session will occur. Nick and his team will go off. Nick is very unique as well because he'll work with a co-supervisor. Now, Nick is the boss, but he'll have someone that handles specifically dialogue. He doesn't want to be dealing with the actors and actresses in terms of looping. His focus is more sound effects centric, story centric, and those things are happening simultaneously. The editing of the dialogue, the editing of or the shooting of the ADR, and that person, Catherine Matson in this case, is on the stage, which is great because we have a person dedicated to being able to fix problems in the dialogue. And this way, Nick can stay focused more on the effects, the background, the Foley, those kinds of elements. But after the spotting session, these guys will have their kind of marching orders, and they'll go off and Jason will have the score prepared, Nick will have all the sound effects, Catherine will do the dialogue, we'll have Foley shot, and then they show up on the dub stage. And that's where we do what we call our pre-dub pass. On a stage that's very much, with this exact console, a bigger version of it, but a room very much like this in the way it's set up in terms of the kind of the stadium seating, and then it's kind of where we sit here. And then we do our pre-dub pass, which is to say we actually work through the tracks, and Diane's not present at that particular part. It's kind of us just laying concrete. Nick likes to say, let's just get it on the screen first. So it's just kind of me working through the dialogue, trying to balance the angles, getting rid of any extraneous noise, equalizing things, smoothing things.
Do you guys know what angles are?
Okay,
Yeah, let's
sorry.
explain
Forgive me for being overly expository. So basically, when a show is shot, it's shot with 1 or 2 microphones at the same time, a boom microphone, lavaliers on, much like these, but hidden on each actor and actress. And then it's shot multiple takes. There'll be a master shot. I'm mixing dialogue and music, and my partner is mixing sound effects and Foley. Yes. So those.
And they pre-dub at the same time, which is crazy because
It's weird.
It's weird.
It's weird.
Imagine hearing dialogue and for one scene and then sound effects for another scene because they're not
At the
always
same
at the same time.
They are somehow doing their own thing, and you're
at the same
hearing
time.
everything.
Yeah.
All one shot. So.
And if you don't know what's going, I don't know how you guys do it. I really don't. It's like the one time I came, like the first time I came in, you guys were doing that. I was like, I gotta go. Like this is too much. I can't. You can't imagine that they're actually hearing what they need to hear, but they do. I mean, these guys do.
We have
amazing
3
work,
days to
so.
do everything, the entire mix. So that includes playback, fixes, print mastering, basically printing the show and creating the stems. But we'll get into that. But basically, my job is to smooth the different takes. As like I said, they're shot. There's a master shot, medium shot, close-ups, all these various angles at different times. And my job is to kind of smooth each of those takes and the dialogue within those takes. And if there's an airplane overhead, filter that out, or let's go to an alternate take, that kind of thing. Make everything smooth so that you don't air conditioning, hums, buzzes, generators, things like that. So that's my job, is to kind of smooth the dialogue. And I'm not playing music. In this show, it's a more sparse score show than some shows. Some shows it's literally carpet wall to wall. This show, it's not.
Then you have a lot of places to hide your flaws in your dialogue. When you don't have anything, you're exposed all the time.
And we have
a lot more work.
It is, and we have a fantastic production sound mixer, Philip Palmer, who provides very good raw tracks to begin with. But while I'm doing that, we're not hearing any music. At the same time, as these guys said, my partner, Kevin Valentine, is sitting here balancing out the things that Nick has provided, the backgrounds, the ambiences, the sound of the birds, the cicadas, the wind, things like that.
Traffic.
And traffic, those are kind of backgrounds. And then he'll do a pass of hard effects. And what's a hard effect? That would be like a gunshot, a car start, a skid, things like that, explosion. So he'll kind of work through passes. It's basically like playing a player piano, these consoles, as you probably know. These are touch-sensitive faders, so every time we go through a pass, we can touch different faders. So it allows our 10 fingers to control hundreds of tracks. So we have to be efficient, and one way to do that is kind of mixing our food groups, mine, dialogue, and music, Kevin's effects and backgrounds, at the same time, sharing the same speakers. It's very odd. I could be working on a very delicate scene, someone kissing, and he could be working on a shootout. But then it all makes sense. Once we work through the show linearly, then we will marry up, and then we'll put the score in, and then he'll put the feed in, the Foley, the footsteps, and things like that. So once we get it on the screen, then we bring Diane in, and for these guys, we'll do an internal playback. It's really a playback for ourselves, and we'll finesse and do things. We'll catch kind of major things. But how would you guys say it is? We can never second guess what our showrunners will want. We can kind of have a best idea of what they're going to want. But let's talk a little bit about that process, our internal playback, and what you guys find from there, the kind of notes that we addressed there.
At that point, for me, it's content. You want to make sure you've covered all your bases. Everything has a sound that you expect it to have a sound. All the dialogue is there, because when you're going through it so fast. I mean, when we're prepping it, we make sure everything is there. But when you have a day and a half to put it all together, he's seeing the tracks for the very first time that morning. So there's things that can easily get missed. So my job and Catherine's job is just for content. We're looking, have we hit all the major notes? Is everything that's supposed to be there in place? And is it working constructively together the way we anticipated it to be? So that's what I'm looking at. And Jason and Diane probably are looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the beauty of having so many different people all dedicated to different parts of the process, where Larry's doing all of it. We can really hone in on our specifics. So for me, it's music. And like Nick, I'm looking at content. I'm making sure the right cues have been laid in. I'm going back to the spotting notes and making sure anything we talked about in the spotting session is being treated and communicated to Larry, so that he knows what the EP's intention is and what they're hoping to hear. And then this is the first time I'm hearing everything, the music playing along with dialogue and playing along with effects. So I'm listening also to levels and are we, crushing the effects or crushing the dialogue? How's the dance going on? How are they all working together? And and I'll note it that way. And then lastly, I'm there to protect the score from with the composer, because the composer's not there to represent. Thomas isn't there to represent at this point. So we've all had discussions on how we think it should play, and I'm there to help communicate that direction to Larry.
I keep telling them that sound effects are way more important than music, but they don't ever seem to ever listen to me. I don't know why, but
I think there's been one time.
One time, yes. In 10 years of working together.
That's right.
So I had one battle.
And that's a very valid argument. We joke about it, but we had a situation in an earlier season of Saul where Dave did a very long cue. If you remember Mike in the desert, don't. I forget how long the queue was. Minutes, right? Several minutes?
It was
About
very
2.5.
long.
Right?
Yeah.
And
3
we
minutes.
ended up doing that just for the DVD, the Blu-ray. We muted it in the show, in the actual mix that aired, and it was just sound effects, ambiances of delicate insects and winds and things like that, footsteps. And it both worked very, very well. But those are the kinds of decisions that come about.
Yeah, this group is really good at working together, like I said, because we've worked together for so long. But, I understand having been in the spotting session together, a lot of times when you do spotting session, music spots separately than sound effects. So having us all in the same room takes a lot longer because you have a lot more discussion going on. But we understand where the notes came from. We understand what the direction was together. So we know that we're going to build the show that way. So the notes, there'll still be issues because you'll think, okay, they really wanted this big, but now the music is taking up a lot of that dynamic space that we thought we had. So you're looking at it from that going, okay, well, if that's where it's going to be, then how's sound effects going to be able to do something else that is counter to that to make it either stand out or vice versa on the music. Maybe we lower the music a little bit to give a little more play for the sound effects. But that's what we're kind of really looking at that first pass.
Exactly. So after we do our internal playback, we do the notes, the changes, the fixes that we've come upon, and then it's ready to present to the showrunners. And it's unique because it isn't just the showrunners. It isn't just Vince and Peter. It's great. They work in a very unique way. It's a very democratic way. Make no mistake, they're decisive in that it's their vision, but they're open to any and all input. And that's from other departments, even people, producers from production, as well as, of course, Thomas is there. And that's not necessarily on every show, music supervising being there. But this show, he's gone through a lot to pick and choose those montages and songs. So his input is, certainly valuable for that. But other departments, obviously the picture editor, the assistant, maybe 20 people, including all of us.
Probably about that.
It's about average.
Yeah. I mean, we always have. The episode writer always comes, and there's a whole cadre of just assistants, and we have our main producers, Mark Johnson and Melissa Bernstein. They come to every playback and give their feedback as well. Melissa's actually really invaluable because she's usually spent a lot of time on set, so she has because she's there throughout the entire shoot, so she's in and out on the set, and she has that knowledge and can share that with us. And so I mean, it's everybody. It's a very open process because I really do think that our guides take very seriously wanting to bring up the next generation of writers and producers. They want these people to
learn,
see what they do, and learn. And I mean, I've never worked anywhere that was that open. I mean, it's really
it's unique.
It doesn't exist elsewhere. That openness.
And I should say also, it's a tribute to Diane too, because Diane is in many ways the clock keeper, like the one to make sure that things move forward. And when you have a big group of people, it's very hard for everyone to know kind of what their place is. And I've definitely had moments when I've made a comment about something that was not a music comment, and then I've watched them puttering away trying to fix the note, and I'm thinking, why the fuck did I just open my mouth? But then I hope that I'm value adding and that someone's going to say, I think I see that there's a point here. So I know for me, I have to always think it has to be about story, and it has to always be about the things that are context. It's not just a taste issue. And I think what Diane is extraordinarily gifted at being both the maternal character that allows the children to run around a little bit, but also the one that says, okay, I think now is the time to let's just wrap this thing up. And I think it's a really tricky role, and it's one
the unfun parent.
Yeah.
But what you do so well, I think, is that you always allow people to have that sense of freedom, and at the same time to also know where the parameters are. And I think without that kind of brinksmanship, it can turn into chaos.
Yeah, just to give an example of that, we have a rule on the stage. Every pad is 1 hour of notes. So if you have 25 people with 25 pads, that's 25 hours of notes. Well, we don't have that long to mix the show. So to be able to manage what needs to be done, what's really the focus for the show is what she does really. She's really the gatekeeper of that. We'll sit there and listen to everybody's notes, and not that everybody gives pages and pages of notes. Peter and Vince, and this is a really unique show because we have two people who are very, very focused that are the voice in the room, but they listen to everybody. Other shows, you have that voice, and they're the only voice. You make a note, and you could be outside. So this is really unique to have those people with that specific ideas, but willing to listen to other people. But like I said, it can easily spin out of control. And Diane does a great job of keeping us on track because we do have to finish.
We do, and that's the thing. I third that motion, fourth it, whatever. She's a fantastic gatekeeper and time management. That's a critical thing because it's easy to go down the rabbit hole. And she gives us a wide berth, or those guys a wide berth, and then at some point we got to get back on track. We have to get through the show. It's a hard thing, the intersection of economics and creativity. I'll bring up one example if you remember. This is a fun one. We were doing a show, and it was a conversation between, at the time, Jimmy McGill, Saul, what his real name, and Mike Ehrmantraut. And Mike, was it Jimmy or Mike? Mike was at the used car lot. And in the background was an inflatable, gigantic gorilla. And visually, it was funny. So someone said, let's put some sound effects to it. And we had another gentleman do a voice to it, like a pitch down laugh, and we had music. And it made Vince snort on playback. He got such a kick out of it. He was delighted by it. So we explored that. That was a little rabbit hole. We went down maybe an hour of playtime.
Yeah, it was a long time.
A little bit louder. A little softer. Let's try a different voice. Let's move it here. We start slicing it up. And those are fun explorations and expeditions. But at some point, he said, let's mute it. It's not helping the story. It's actually distracting from what we want to be conveyed story-wise. And it's fun going on those little expeditions. We had a few others last season. I think, was it Vince's show? Did he direct the one that Heather wrote?
No, that was John Shiven.
Got it. But Vince was very insistent on, in terms of having the gunfire come from the surrounds, and we really paid a lot of attention to where the placement in the room was, because obviously what was happening on screen, we were really focusing on the main character, not the gunfight. We kind of spent a lot of time putting it in the back. But we have a certain amount of time to experiment, and Diane, again, is very good at making sure that we do the creative things, but also we got to get through the show. So it's kind of a balance. So to that end, we can talk about the politics of the mixing stage, and this group is unique. It is like a master class, and everyone does have a voice, and everyone has a valid opinion, but at some point, we have to kind of prioritize. And how would you guys say we best prioritize notes? I mean, because everyone's giving a note, how do we give each thing a very different value of import?
I mean, I think one thing which is really key is everybody does time codes, so we kind of go in order usually, which is really helpful. And so it kind of allows people to weigh in different times. I think also because Vince and Peter are almost always have the most notes, like I always know that just shut the hell up and then just see if someone else has the note. And if nobody else has the note, then I might be like, should I say something? And then I'm like, you know what? It's really just my opinion. And I think that that's not necessarily adding anything here. And it's not bugging anybody else out. So I'm going to drop my notes. So I do a lot of notes, but I tend to only announce a couple of them if I feel like they're really important. And obviously, if they're tied to music, they're important. But I'll also do ones about Dave, too, because a lot of times, because, you know, each of us are kind of protecting of the story. So in a sense, it's important to know where that balance is. And I think what Vince and Peter are extraordinarily good at is knowing what is the lead in this and what is the back in this. And there's a lot of times, and this is also what's really exciting for us about what Nick does, is that we won't know what Nick is doing, and all of these interesting new ideas come in that were basically sparked in the spotting session, and we don't know how important they are. And suddenly I'm thinking like, oh, that source cue that felt so cool and funky, I'm actually want to pull it back now, because all the sounds that Nick is doing are really far more important, and the song will be distracting where the story is really tied to the sounds that he's designed in there. So for us, it's really important to always feel like story is the most important. All ego shit has to be put aside. It has to be about what is going to help the scene the most. And
Very
sometimes
well
we can give permission by saying, should we bring that down? And they might be like, oh, well, we don't, Dave, everyone's very protective of Dave too. And I think Dave is also very smart about knowing that it's really all about story. And I think that's the culture that they built.
And I think, sort of related to that, but I think people don't ever give sound the respect that it deserves as 50% of the story. I mean, you're seeing something, but you are hearing something. And what you're hearing is going to make you feel something that you might not feel just by looking at the screen. And that's everything we do, you know, from the beginning to the end, you know, the 3 days on the stage is about telling the story in the most effective, most impactful way that we can. And every note is considered like kind of from that, you know, perspective. It's like, because how you hear the story told to you is just as important as watching it. And sound really does get kind of like the short shrift, and it really shouldn't, because when you think about things in movies that move you, how often is it music? And of course, it's, you know, those are the memorable moments you know.
Or how much dialogue. Like, I think I'm always amazed on certain projects that I work on, which are a little bit more sloppy. Sorry. It's always a little shocking when you realize, like, I'm not catching half of what's being said, or the accentuation isn't there. And I think what's so great about this group is figuring out, when is it really important to get absolute clarity on it? Is there another take? Is there another angle? Is there another microphone that might catch that? And how can we strip other things away to make sure that it's given enough weight, especially if we don't have the resources we need to really capture that moment,
I
a
mean,
muttered line.
And I mean, Jason, you and I have definitely worked on shows where you're mixing the show and it's fine, but the showrunners they only care about the words. Like the rest of it is not as important in terms of how you're telling a story. And that's what's so wonderful about this show, is that yes, we want to hear the words. The words are important, but the other stuff is equally as important. And we can have so much fun, you know, putting those worlds together. You know, just like, you know, the pilot episode of Better Call Saul is like 7 minutes in a courtroom
Without a word of
with
dialogue.
no music, and like in the beginning, there's nobody's even saying anything,
That's right.
and people are just sitting there breathing and like you know, clicking, and you know, I mean,
The
it's
big
just
gulp.
like
It's all Nick.
and that's all Nick, but that's also, you know, that's Vincent Peters saying, people are going to say, what the hell's going on in this show?
Yeah.
You know, and nobody would make that choice.
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
they're very
It's
bold.
Very bold. Very bold.
It is, and because of the dialogue track is so well recorded to begin with, and we try to keep it clean, it can sustain. It's not fragile. It can sustain being crowded with score and sound effects and songs and things like that. And this,
And we had a problem. I mean, that first episode, that mix was really rough because, you know, on Breaking Bad, the dialogue was, didn't have the same mixer. The dialogue was much more fragile, and we could not build the world around it the way that we can on Saul. And I mean, I think Saul sounds better than Breaking Bad ever did, and Breaking Bad was a great sounding show. But because the dialogue is richer and it sounds as it should, it can sustain more stuff being thrown at it, like Larry says, and we really can build. You know, I mean, the first time we listened to that courthouse in the first playback of that pilot, it was not what Vince wanted, because we were so afraid to put the world in there, because we had never really been able to do that before. And so learning that we could do that, it was a big readjustment.
yeah, we can crowd things a lot
from
more.
one show to the other, and now we're really just, it's like no holds barred, like Nick, go crazy.
And we do crowd things. And everything is extremely subjective, and part of my job, I'm the point person on the stage, so the stage is set up very much like this, with this, like I said, this same desk, and I'm facing forward, and it's imperative upon me to turn around and face the clients, which are sitting here. And some shows and some crews, that's not necessarily the case. They'll talk from here, but eye contact is important. Someone is looking for someone, I'll take the notes and be engaged. That's part of the process. It's not just the technical part of it. We have to assume that we all have some technical competence to be able to do the job, but it's all the soft skills, being able to talk and communicate and do other things like translate what someone is saying, because someone might not speak sound. My email address is sounddweeb@gmail.com, and I'm a dweeb. I'm a sound dweeb. But some of these guys aren't sound dweebs. They just speak normal lexicon, if you will, normal words, and they'll say, it's a little bit muddy, or it's a little tubby, or not even that specific. It might be, it's a little blue, it's a little, can you make it a little this? And my job is to interpret what they're saying.
You have not struggled with language until you have tried to get someone to understand if you want something earlier or later.
Right.
It is
That's
insane.
exactly right. It sounds simple. Do you retard it? Are we advancing it to picture? So we just say towards breakfast, towards dinner.
And then you get
Earlier
it.
or later.
Now you know what
You
it
get
means.
it.
Means it's a very, and we have a lot of those expressions. I come up with expressions that the showrunners use. If we want to do just a subtle change, wave the vermouth bottle over it. You know, maybe it's a subtle little EQ tweak. And I have to interpret if they say, it's a little muddy, I'm having a hard time understanding it. It's not always just level. Maybe it's raise it a little bit, maybe it's a little bit muddy, so let's roll off a little low end, let's raise a little the top end. It's my job to interpret what they're saying quickly and efficiently. And that's the thing, you don't have too many passes to get these things right, otherwise I wouldn't be employed. So you have to be quick, efficient, and as well as have little techniques, shortcuts. And when I'm playing something back with a fix, we don't want to make the fix so minute that it's like a half a decibel, which is a small gradation. It has to be enough of a change, so okay, I can hear that, that's louder. Almost like bracketing. If I make a large raise, all right, let's split the difference. Don't go quite so high. Same thing with lowering it, same thing with equalizing it, or put some reverb on it. And sometimes they don't say the word reverb, but they'll say echo or make it wet or put it in a room, whatever. So my job is to kind of interpret what the client is saying. So it really becomes about translation. And then there's a hierarchy on the mixing stage. Now, Diane is our co-executive producer, and it's very democratic, but she's the boss. And then we all work for the showrunners, who are ultimately, they have the final say. So they'll listen to everybody, but it's really ultimately their voice and their vision. And as Thomas was saying, there's no ego. You can't have any ego. And body language is important. If I'm facing forward and someone gives a note and I go like this, or they see my shoulder shrug or I sigh, that's not going to go over well. So it's really not taking any of these things personally. It's not impugning my skills as a mixer. It's just it's subjective. There's no right or wrong. It's just a different way of
let's
doing
talk
There's
about
a lot of subtle eye rolling.
looking forward.
Looking forward, right.
Exactly. Go ahead. You expand upon that.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, you'll. Luckily, this group speaks cinematically very well. But there'll be something where you put something together, and they'll ask for a note that's just not. They want the birds to sound like dogs. I mean, and your job as a supervisor is, okay, well, how do I interpret that and how do I do that and make it what they want, and sometimes, you just kind of this, it's not going to work, but you
can't say no. That's the thing.
You can't say no.
That communicates a negativity and impossibility, a lack of willingness to experiment, and we have to. And sometimes we do come upon happy accidents, right?
Totally. All the time.
Jason, we can cite
All the
examples
time.
of playing multiple things, and we had an episode of Saul. The opening had multiple pieces of source, and Thomas and Jason helped me craft that, so where they would come in and out, and we were trying to make kind of a
Emmy-nominated episode.
Oh, well, there you go.
Good luck tomorrow.
And thank you. Well, very kind. So yeah, they crafted this whole sequence of music coming from different places, and we spent some time trying to make it sound like it was very ethereal, coming from kind of not necessarily connected to any one particular source. So we have techniques and tools like panning it where it comes in the speakers in the room, or in this case in the environment, and we can make things muddy, make things boomy. You know how when you hear a car go by, it's...
And this episode really is kind of a master class in sound design of everybody working together.
This is our Pirates of the Caribbean
This is
thing?
episode, it's episode 404. It's called Chalk, and the opening is, it isn't even any of our major characters. I mean, it's like two of the guys that work for Gus, and they're doing a scam on someone, and they're just walking into a drug den and they're making a deal, but they go past all these rooms, and every room has some different sound coming out of it. And traveling with this guy as he's carrying the drugs in to sell them to this other gang, and we walk with him through this world. And yeah, I mean, that's how we talked about it, was Pirates of the Caribbean, because there's something weird happening in this room, and there's something weirder happening in that room, and
you're hearing them bleed together.
Yeah, and it was ADR. It's the group, it's the loop group and what they're doing in the rooms, and it's all of these different source cues that you guys found. And we didn't have a score in there, but it was.
No, but what was interesting about talking about the score in that, there was the bass track. Mm-hmm. There was one piece of music, so it was like they said, there was all these different rooms, but there was one kind of bass track that when they first came in, that was kind of this thump that.
Played
throughout. So you kind of had a percussion that kind of ran through the whole thing, that was kind of the glue that held it all together. Yeah. And so so the other things would kind of waft in and out, but you had this moment, especially because you don't know what's happening, and then when they get to the kind of the drug room, you realize it's very tense. There's these guys with machine guns and whatnot. So this thump became kind of the tension for holding the whole thing together, even though these other elements were coming in and going as they were walking through. It was really unique. And part of that is in how they decide which pieces those are. You can't just randomly just say, okay, let's throw together, this rap song and this. You have to really feel it. Thomas and Jason really did a great job of, and then, like I said, I fill in kind of the holes. There might be some, people having sex, or there might be some card buys or whatever to kind of fill in the holes. But they had done a great job of picking those pieces so that it was telling this other story as we were walking through. It's really, really brilliant.
It was. And Catherine, the dialogue co-supervisor, had loop group, which is to say people that were doing little voices in the background with specific conversations that were all kind of peppered in throughout. So it really was a big cornucopia of sound, yeah.
Well, let's tie this into the hierarchy of the mix stage, because it was that scene, actually, and this is something you do a lot, Thomas, is he'd hear it, and the first playback wouldn't be quite what he had in his head. He wanted something, he had some other ideas. So instead of approach Larry and the entire room, he'll come pull me aside and we'll sit down and powwow. I might mock something up on, on my standalone rig that doesn't, go through the big speakers. And he'll sit on headphones and he'll listen and we'll get the idea solidified. And then we'll bring that to Larry through Diane and talk to Nick about it as well. And so there's definitely a chain of command that happens to make sure that time is being spent efficiently and that things are being communicated as well as possible.
One thing that's really nice that we've kind of fallen into now that we have 3 days. I mean, we used to do Breaking Bad in 2 days. 2 days. And no shows do
incredible
that
amount of
anymore.
work,
I mean,
just so you
you can't even imagine doing that in 2 days.
No show is doing 2 days
We
anymore.
They
did it
just
in 2
don't. It's
days.
impossible.
Yeah.
So we have 3 now. Oh boy.
Yeah.
But so we work really hard up until early evening of the second day, and that's when the guys come in and we do the playback. And it works really well because we spend probably 2 hours going through the notes every time.
At least.
Just like we do
At
in
least.
spotting session with.
That's
Yeah.
just us talking about
Just
the notes,
talking.
Just taking
working
it
through
down.
every note.
talking.
It's a discussion about each little thing.
Yeah.
Things that you might not think would require a discussion. Even
Yeah.
the footsteps.
Yeah.
Is it a squeaky
Is
leather
that the right
shoe?
shoe? And
Is it the right surface?
Yeah.
We get into what seems to be the weeds, but the beauty of these guys is the devil is the details, not
Yeah.
even just in the details, and it really does help.
But then the next day, we go in by ourselves, and we get to work through all those notes without somebody sitting in the back impatiently just wanting to go home. So we do get to work through them and try things out on our own time, and then when they come back, we can present a very polished, adjustment. It's not final yet, but it's like the next round, right? And we can talk through and say, hey, this note that we talked about where the music was maybe not quite right in this Pirates of the Caribbean thing, like Thomas and Jason worked something up last night. Let's show this to you and see how you guys feel about that. And they're always so open to that, and they want to know that we've done that work before they come back.
For sure.
And because that does make it go much smoother when they do come back, and that is part of the way. That's another way, because like the thing I was gonna bring up is like, sometimes you actually have to somehow tell them that their idea is bad. And that's the hardest thing, I mean, we've had times where somebody wanted us to raise the music and it really was too loud. And you kind of have to take it till it breaks a little bit, and then that's a phrase we use a lot. And we don't always win when we have those conversations, but you do have to somehow diplomatically say, like, you know what, I think this is too loud and it's hurting the dialogue and the scene here, and it's less effective because it's this way. And a lot of times they will dial it back.
That is true. There's a mutual respect amongst the showrunners and us, so they do respect our opinion and our input. It's not a dictatorship. And as Diane said, we've all worked on shows where it is just one person, not 20 people. It's one person at the actual mix point. The showrunner that will be the only person giving notes, and it's good in a way because it's very efficient. It's one person, but it's not democratic. It's really their vision, and sometimes just having that can make an inferior product to this, where all points of view are welcome.
Well, perspective is such a huge part of it, and I think that one of the tricky things for all of us is to make sure that our perspective is not based upon being surprised by what we're hearing, but on going back to what is there for story. One of the things I always really appreciate, especially about this team, and Jason is a master of spotting notes. Our spotting notes are so detailed, and he will catch little quotes of things that people said that honestly I don't remember, and then I'll be like, oh, now I get it. And now I can take that and channel that in. Also, when we do our presentation, I will sometimes have a different idea about how the EQs might be, and I tend to be really careful about EQs. I want to make sure that when we're presenting the options, we're doing it in a way that's realistic to the actual environment. So on other shows, I've gotten to the mix stage and I've been like, holy shit, what the hell is this? Like, it's like an over when it should be way buried in the background. That never happens with us because Jason's part of that process from the get-go, and we already have an idea of what role it should be. Also, we have a bit of a nomenclature for how music is used in general, and we have a sense of if it's a lead or if it's a support, if it's a subtle texture, if it's something that's, you know, rhythmically important. And we make small tweaks. We might be like, you know what, let's just take the mids off because it's fighting with dialogue and just push the low end, and that way you feel it more than you hear it. And that little subtle change, which is something that can be done very efficiently on the stage, will change the way the scene works. And it will allow the music now to be an added element to the story instead of being just something else that adds to the soup.
It's very true. And those kinds of changes, knowing when to do things on the stage and then doing them offline, as Jason was talking about earlier, doing like in that kind of Pirates of the Caribbean scene, it was much more efficient for him to play with the timing and the different selections of songs rather than me taking up stage time doing that. It makes much more sense. Same thing with Nick. If he has a very complicated sequence where, let me rework this, the gunfire, we need more of a sweetener on top of each gunshot, he'll cut that offline instead of, you know, taking down the stage to literally do that. If it's a quick fix, he will literally sit at Kevin's rig and do the fix quickly, or we can move things around. Same thing with music. If it's a quick thing, I can add a little reverb to tail something off or raise or lower, but more complicated things we'll do offline. So it's really that juggle of knowing when to hold them and when to fold them, right? And there's no, you know, strike against one's ego if we can't do it, and we say, you know what, let's best use this time by us moving forward and you guys working off.
It's a little bit like a car race, right? You know, you're not gonna rebuild a car engine in the middle of a race, right? It's more pit stops, right? So you're just trying to get the wheels back on, get the gas filled up, and keep moving. So we're always trying to find ways on the stage. If this is going to take some time, let's try to do it offline, or we're going to spend some time and then we'll address these other issues as they come up. But it's really about managing that time and keeping the process moving forward. Because like I said, we're going to run out of time, and if we run out of time, we're not going to finish. So it's all about that time management. The one thing that is good about this show is on that third day after we've had all those people in the room, the last day after we have done the notes, we generally only get like Peter or Vince. So the group is much smaller. And then it's really focused on, you know, playing each scene and then hearing it just with that person. So they've taken in all those notes and all those ideas, and now they're going to focus in on, is it doing what I expect it to be doing? So we don't have like a constant 25, you know, people giving notes the whole time.
Yeah, because we would never finish.
We would never finish. We would, we'd still be on season 1 now. So, but no, so it does narrow itself down. But like I said, our job in the meantime is just to keep it moving so that we can get through to the end of the day.
And the temperament of everyone is very, very good. Everyone's very congenial, because sometimes we started Saul with 2 days, and it was long days.
Yeah, we realized we couldn't do it.
It was the same workflow, though.
It
They
was
just
the
went
same.
to dinner and then came
They
back.
came back, yeah. This allows a little more breathing room, and it's great because it allows us a night to go away, and if we need to further work on things off the clock, we can.
So your ears get a break, you know? I mean, that's really important.
Just to give you an example, average shows now are 4 days. I'd say 3-4 days. And this is not an average show. It might seem like it on the surface, but as you guys hear about the politics and the dynamics that go into doing this, it's a lot of work to do in 3 days. I mean, I do a ton of shows, and Jason does a ton of shows, and we know what it takes. But an average show is maybe 3-4 days. A sitcom might be 1 or 2 days. Big shows like a Game of Thrones can be anywhere from 9 days to some of those big episodes might be. I think the one episode was 27 days.
Actually, the one we're up against, which they will probably
Will win.
they will win. It's 33 days for the
33
episode, the big battles.
We did the entire movie, the Breaking Bad movie, in 27 days. So that tells you, how big of an episode that is. So, like I said, but the level of work that's being done in that hour for those 3 days is massive. So it's really, everybody has to really kind of make good decisions even before they come to the stage. That's why they are a little longer, 9-hour days.
They're not 9-hour days. The first day is 9 hours.
The first two,
The first day is 9 hours.
Yeah,
The second day it
10 hours.
can be 9, depends on how many notes we get, but It's usually 10, and then the third day we work until we finish.
Yeah, but we've been pretty good at getting it, close to that 9 hour on the second day because we can work efficiently. If we have a bigger show and there's a lot happening, we know that's going to take a little longer. But when we were doing Breaking Bad and we were trying to do those in 2 days, that like we said, they would break for dinner. We would work straight through.
Yeah.
They would come back maybe 7, 8 o'clock at night.
Drunk.
Sometimes.
and the group would leave and a lot more people would come back. Like I said, now it's much more focused, but we would work till we were done. And sometimes that was
2 in the morning.
1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And, if the mix crew had another show starting in the morning, we were really up against it. So it was a crazy amount of
That's
work.
a tough assignment, and Diane brings up a good point. It's ear fatigue, which you get. It becomes a point of diminishing return if you work too many long hours in a row, because your ears do go kind of into compression, and you're not making the most, pun intended, sound decisions working that many hours. You become fatigued, and maybe you'll start pushing music too loudly, and then your ears will kind of hurt. Everything kind of sounds loud. So it's best to take a break if you can.
We work at 79 to 82 dB all day. So imagine listening to something that loud all day.
Yeah, and to give you an idea what that is, a feature film plays at 85 decibels, and the decibel scale is very much like the Richter scale. It's a 6 decibels is twice the amount of volume, actual electrical energy. So 79 decibels, what we mix at is much lower in volume than what a movie is. But even still, it's still loud enough so that many hours you start hearing it and feeling it. But yeah, the temperament is so important, and the relationship that we have is great. We're colleagues and friends, and it's wonderful because the show, being what it is almost the cherry on top. I mean, I would love to work with this group on any show. It doesn't matter, and we learned that when we did Enlisted together. It's like that was a fun show to do, but working on this show, it's great. The content is so great, but it really does matter who you work with, because it can be a miserable experience if you have a dictator for showrunners, and we don't. These are the nicest people. Everyone's very polite and kind and friendly, and they set the tone, because, as they always say, the fish rots from the head. They set the tone in terms of behavior. What's the behavior on the stage? How do we treat each other? Is there profanity? What's the humor like? And then that's okay. It's not my job to do that first. I kind of react to what the client does first and foremost, and then we'll all kind of, at this point, it's already been established. It's long been established, and we can just kind of go right into riffing. But those are the kinds of things when you're working on shows with new clients. You let the client establish really what the temperament of the room is, the temperature of the room, if you will. And with this particular group, it's wonderful. It's enjoyable. Like, we look forward to these mixes. They become almost a wonderful place to hang. People like to come to the stage.
That's why we have so many people in the backfield.
That's right.
Yeah,
It's
a party.
Yeah. It
Well,
sounds miserable, but it's not.
No, it is fun.
Only
and
for
I
me.
mean, well, and it's, you get to see the show finished on a big screen, all the colors done at that point, and the visual effects are usually done. So, yeah, I mean, it's fun to kind of watch it on the big screen and hear what these guys have done, because it never ceases to amaze me, the transformation from you lock the picture and you're like, yeah, it's a good episode. This is in really good shape, and then you get to the stage and it's like at another level. It is so gratifying. I mean,
And it's film school for us. I mean, I think that's the thing which is so nice, is that we have such a deeply talented group. Like, everybody is just really good at their job. And Jason will be frequently more quiet, but he has such authority on the stage, because as soon as anybody asks Jason a question, like, the whole room just kind of waits. We're like, I talk too much, so like I've lost my credibility a long time ago. But I think that's sort of part of it. Like, I'm learning so much just in the choices that are being made, and I think that for all of us who feel so lucky to be part of filmmaking at its very highest levels, we kind of are learning from each person. Like, I think all of us would be great filmmakers simply from the experience of having worked with the best ones out there.
Sure. It's film school every day for us.
Sure.
Yeah,
it is.
It is.
And it goes to show the level of dedication and loyalty. Vince wrote and directed the Breaking Bad movie and came to us. That's a very unique thing, to have a feeture film. It's going to be on Netflix, but it was intended originally it's written as a feature film.
It will be in theaters. It will.
There you go.
It will be in theaters for a very brief time.
Excellent. Sounds amazing.
Yes, it will.
It does.
They're going to announce it hopefully in the next week or so.
Awesome. But that's a unique thing. He was very loyal to us. He said, of course you guys are going to mix it. And that's not necessarily typical. It's very siloed. So the broadcast division is...
I would be hard pressed to think of another time that it happened.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
You're right about that. I was at Sony many years ago, and I did a temp mix to a movie called Rocky Balboa. and Sylvester Stallone was on the stage with us and giving us notes, and he wanted us to mix his final. It was not a big budget film, and Sony wouldn't let us. It's like we were in the TV division. They wanted feature film mixers, so it's very much that divisional. It's much less so now because it's all about content, and the platform is less. I mean, this will end up on tablets and phones, and you know, we have to accept that there's a lot more of this cross-pollination now. But at that time, it was much more, and still to a big degree, it's very political. The feature film mixing world is even more political than this. This is you know, firing on you know, sophistication, and it can be political too, but not to the degree that even feature films is.
I think for us too, it's interesting too because we are so spoiled in a sense from the environment that we have that when we get into other projects, it can be sometimes a little bit heartbreaking about like, you know, music supervisors are frequently not a very respected craft. And I've definitely been on projects where like I've had a lot of things I could be contributing, but the culture and the climate is not really allowing that. And because of the sort of the politicization of the hierarchy and so forth, I just realized like I don't have much to contribute here, but I can't be gone either because like if anything needs to be handled or dealt with, I've got to be there to handle it. So now my job is just to have a whole bunch of plan Bs and Cs, not really being able to think in terms of like how can I contribute here, but more of how can I make sure that if something springs a leak, I got the tape to put the thing on it so the water doesn't leak in the basement. And that changes the way the job is. And so in those situations, I have to be like, all right, I'm just going to sit here and wait for like some water to sprout, you know, and
Indeed, and not to detract, I mean, this show is by far one of the highlights of my career, but the three of us also work on Ozark, which is a different dynamic. That is a dynamic we primarily do that pass that we talked about with the picture editor because they've been working with Jason Bateman, who's very involved in the show as a showrunner as well as an actor and often director. And then he comes in and it's very different. These guys give, it's like a reverse pyramid. These guys give a lot of notes because they are very detail oriented, and it's not a bad thing, it's just a different approach. Jason is more a broad stroke kind of person, but he is the point person and the only person. Matter of fact, when Netflix comes in, they don't even come in anymore, but when they did,
Chris Mundy, who's the writer and basically the creator and the showrunner, doesn't come to Jason's playback. Jason is basically the point person, which is
And that's his is the final one, right? You guys do the other one, and then that's Jason's is at the end.
No, Jason comes
Jason's
first.
Oh, he comes first.
Which
Okay.
is great because what ends up happening is who's going to say
Yeah.
Jason's wrong, right? Especially because you know he's the main director too. So it's great for us because we know that the notes after Jason's been there are going to be very, very minimal because nobody's going to. It would be the same thing like if we only used Vince and Vince had done a pass. We did this on the movie
Yeah, on the
where
movie.
Vince spent what was it, 15 days with us mixing the feature. After we were done, nobody was going to come in and say, "Oh well, Vince, let me tell you, I don't think that was working."
That's
well."
exactly
You know?
right.
So it's a different dynamic than this show because, like I said, Jason will come in, he'll give the notes, go through everything. He's been through the music and stuff, so he doesn't have as much time, so he's really focused. He gives the notes, and then we're done. And then, like I said, then we'll bring Netflix in, and we'll bring in even our showrunners. And then, like I said, they may have one or two small notes, but it's basically done at that point.
Yeah, and I bring it up to illustrate how that dynamic is very different than the dynamic on
they're all
Saul.
different.
And you even mentioned with the same people, with Vince,
Yeah.
who wrote and directed the movie. A lot of the same people, a lot of the same crew, that shot it, and us. It's just it was a different way. It was a very pleasing way. It was nice having that kind of unified voice. And we had a lot more time. When you have more time, money, and resources, you can really finesse things. What we tried to do in 3 days, which I think we succeed well on Saul. On the Breaking Bad movie, we had more time. So there's a lot more what we talk about pre-dubbing. There's a week of just that for dubbing.
Well, and I mean, when shows used to be forced to mix in 2 days, they were 44 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, now we have shows that are like 57 minutes. I mean, that's so much more time to have to get through.
Doesn't sound like that much.
It doesn't sound like that much, but it's
a lot.
so much, especially if you got a big action scene or something like that. A lot of characters and lots of stuff going on. It's just virtually impossible to get it done in that time. But we still are doing it. I mean, we have some episodes of Salt, like last season. Something Stupid, number 7 was like 41 minutes.
yeah.
But then, episode 10 was like 56 or something like that. And we don't get more time. I mean, you just have to buckle down and get it done.
Yeah.
through it fast.
You just really do.
And then it's kudos to you. Diane's such a very strong producer that the showrunners trust her and kind of, just tell me where I need to be, tell me what to do in that. how much time do we have? If you say we got to move on, they listen. And that's an important thing because we could easily go down rabbit holes left and right. The whole yard would be filled with holes like a gopher if we just let everybody kind of run amok. So we need that person. We need her to keep us
and they
on track.
respect that process,
Completely.
so that helps. I mean, that makes it easier on me because they do understand that there are parameters that we have to somehow.
And
fit
they learn to
into.
prioritize too,
They do.
right? I mean, they're never going to do anything that's going to compromise or hurt the show in any way. So they're not going to say, okay, well, I'm out of time, I'm not going to finish. That's never really going to happen. They learn to kind of, okay, well, you know, I know I got this big sequence coming up. I know I need to go. I'm going to probably spend X amount of hours through here. So this little note, we'll let that go for now, and you know, we'll come back to it or whatnot. But they've learned to manage their time as well, and they can see the big picture, and they know the day before where they're kind of at, so they can budget their time kind of accordingly as well. But sometimes it gets out of control, but generally it's pretty efficient at that point.
There's a lot less mystery to what we do now because usually we have many screens. This looks like a one mixer position here, but I work with a partner on a similar console, and you can see what's going on. You see we use Pro Tools as our digital audio workstation, and you can see the tracks going by, and you can, hey, that yellow track, and you just move that one here, and so it's less of a voodoo kind of a science, and people are used to doing things either on your phone or your tablet. You can manipulate audio, and you know what the tools are. But we do have, as the technologies improve, we have tools that have helped us do things that are incredible. We had a situation where I have a tool in the newest version of Isotope. I can rebalance within the music if it's just a stereo stem, even taking down the vocals if I need to kind of tuck that under dialogue. So tools like that and noise reduction, like anything else, used judiciously. We certainly don't want to kill an ant with a bazooka. But so what's your perspective, guys, from sitting behind me? During the process as Kevin and I sit in mix? Like what's coming from each of your disciplines? What's your perspective, you know, on the mix in terms of your experience as you're watching us mix? Like what's that experience like?
I think Diane touched on at times if you're in the pre-dub stage, it can be quite confusing. Even for me, who does it every day, there's days where I'm like, oh, that sound effect or that dialogue, you know, like, oh no, you can't listen to it now. It's not part of the whole scene.
And one of them's working with the picture on their little screen, and the other one has the big screen. So like, but what you're hearing out here is going with what's on the little screen. It's just like crazy.
And even like I said, we've been doing it forever, and it still gets a little confusing. You actually have some mixed teams where one guy will occupy the room. Usually which is weird, it's always the dialogue guy because dialogue and music is always more important than sound effects. And so then you're building these huge sound effects sequences on headphones, right? So they're working on headphones, and it's counterintuitive, right?
But on Breaking Bad, like yeah, you guys, like I said, your process is terrifying. But but like on Breaking Bad, our dialogue mixer for the pre-dub phase, the dialogue mixer had headphones. And so he had headphones, and he was working with the big picture up here because he needed to see sync and stuff like that. And then the sound effects mixer would have the room because he wanted to be placing everything around the room, and he was working with the little picture over here. So you'd be in there, and then, but like you couldn't speak. You were not allowed to speak. No talking. Like you know, you had to be hearing everything, and yeah, it was very tense, very tense. So that process was not so fun. With these guys, it always feels a little bit like a free-for-all when you guys are mixing like that.
And I think for me, the big thing is, you know, we've been through these steps along the way. You know, we've talked about in spotting. I've been in the editing room with my editors putting the material together. Sometimes I've gotten the score, the music, maybe early where I'm working against it. And then you get to the stage, and then these guys get their hands on it. And the way I work with my editors is I give them a pretty long leash. I give them specific notes, but I let them kind of go with it. So they come with they may come with a different idea or thought than I may have had going into it. So it's nice to have options or different perspectives, just like we would do when have everybody in the room. But then same thing goes on the stage. Once I hand over those tracks to these guys and they get their hands on it, they may take it in another direction, and they're so creative that they'll open up other ideas of things that I may on the fly go, oh, well, that's a great idea. Let me build off of that. So that it ends up changing the dynamics of how we work together in the room, because they're going to bring their creativity when they begin to work with the material. And that goes on the dialogue side. It happens all the time on the music side.
It's kind of, I mean, that's actually one of the great gifts of this show is that, like, you know, as much as we, you know, it's Vincent Peters' world and we're just living in it to some degree, they want us to surprise them.
Absolutely.
You know, they really want everybody to bring their best ideas, and people do because they know they'll be heard, and that there's a chance of that ending up, you know.
And there
on
are times
screen.
where, you know, we'll like I said, we'll have the notes, but we'll get on the stage and something will have changed. Like I said, it might be something how Larry dealt with the dialogue, or Kevin came up with an idea with the effects that changes the whole idea of what the scene is, and then maybe it's better. So then you got to have Diane's the first line of that. We'll present it to Diane and say, "What do you think of this?" And she'll be like, "Wow, that's not what we talked about, but I like it. Let's present it." You know, because if they don't see it, they're never going to know, right? So you got to put it out there. But like I said, that comes together a lot of times in that last, you know, pass of where we're working together, and totally, and then having the confidence of saying, you know what, we are stepping out of what was said or what we think is going to be, and letting it go, and seeing seeing what they think, and a lot of times they like that, you know. Sometimes.
That last part of the day, not the last part. It's like the middle of the process, basically. After you guys have done your pre-dub, and then I come in to see it for the first time, and kind of like watching it get put together. You know, sometimes I'm there. Sometimes I'm there when I like to be there when they start marrying up, if I can. I can't always because I have too many other things going on. But whenever I can, I like to.
And
be
just,
there
you know,
for that
marrying
part.
up, what that means is they've been working independently in the room, at
Yeah.
the same time. But it's the first time we start playing the scenes.
Everything all together.
Yeah, together, so we can hear, okay, there was too many birds, or there's, you know, not enough dialogue, or whatever. It's part of that whole building process that we do before we actually play back the whole show. So it's their first time of, these are all the elements that we have. This is what we think it's going to sound like, and they start kind of balancing it for that first piece. That's the
and that's where we're really deciding what's a favor, you know, like what needs to take the lead in any particular scene, and for what reasons, and so that's actually really my favorite part of the process, because there's also like a fire under us at that point, because they're coming at a certain time, you know, so like it really, I mean, I started in live TV, and that's about the closest I get to that feeling anymore, because like they're coming at 5 o'clock, and we got to be ready, and so we're moving through it as fast as we can, and we're listening, and we're making creative decisions, and we're all kind of, you know, talking it through as a team, and then it's showtime, and you know, it's as good as it's going to get. I mean, the good thing is we know it doesn't have to be done, you know, it just has to be, as Nick always says, get it on the screen, get it sounding like a show. And I mean, we could broadcast that first pass that we play for
really
them
good.
could absolutely go on the air, and it would be great. But it's always better after they've come in. It always is. I mean, there's a reason these guys are who they are and have the show and are successful and have been doing this for 11 years now, and it's because their talent and their taste is just kind of unparalleled. I mean, they think of things other people don't think of.
And I bet if you were to take this, and I haven't really done this, but I would love to, is to take an episode and literally mark down sound issues. Like, what is the lead in that? What are the elements in that? And I'd be willing to bet you would see consistency going all the way across, that there's almost always a lead, a support, and a balance between the two of them. There's always these little empty moments. I love seeing how those little empty moments get a car by, a plane, you know, the
Very
door closed,
precise how that stuff gets
and it
closed.
has a dance to it. And when
We
you
have a lot of silence on the show.
Yeah.
I mean, we have characters who don't speak.
For long periods of time, and that's actually more challenging than what you would think. The action scenes, we often get fewer notes on the action scenes, because that's, you know, you hear a gun, see a gun. It has to be right. It has to be well done, well cut, well mixed. Same thing with the music, big scenes, but the detailed scenes, when I say detail, like tiny little things, there's a little creak, there's the building is swaying, we want to hear a little corrugated metal creak, those kinds of little tasty elements.
Oh yeah, I mean, we have 8-minute dialogue scenes where two guys are sitting in a room talking. That's, you know, granted the show is well written, so the action is in the actors and in the words they're saying, but to hold the room, if you're not going to do it with music, you've got to find ways to hold the whole show together in those scenes, and it becomes that subtlety and things you look for. And that's what's great about this show is, because of the restraint that they have with music, when music does come in, it has a much huger and much bigger impact all the way through. And it's really telling, it's not just wallpaper, it's telling part of that story, which is really, really important.
And all those decisions happen in the marrying up stage.
Absolutely.
Like, that's why it's so much fun, is because you do get to play and you find that dance
Yeah.
when it's, because that's the first time we're all hearing it together after your chaotic process of split dialogue and effect.
To that end, I want to open up the room. Any questions?
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the interpersonal politics of, like, if you have a thought, or even more if you're specifically asked by a showrunner or director to weigh in on something that is not your domain, and how that works. Are you, conscious that you might be blowing apart the hour and a half that somebody spent finding that footstep, and maybe you just don't say anything, or kind of, it sounds like this team in particular is pretty well dialed in, but
Yeah, no,
maybe
that's
on other
a good
projects?
question. No, that's a great question. I did a show last summer called The Romanovs, and Matthew Weiner is incredibly, I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, he is the leader, the dictator, if you will, of that particular show. He was open to ideas, but he had a very specific view of what he wanted. So I have to be very diplomatic. And it's more how I am as a person, I think. Sometimes too much to beat around the bush. But it worked in that instance, and I think with most groups, you treat things delicately, because you recognize people's craft. You want to give it the proper respect that it deserves. So I delicately suggest.
Yeah, and I would say you will be in rooms where you have to kind of hone your skill of sensing how open people are to hearing it, and you can't really like teach that. Like, you really do have to kind of, like, I certainly, if I was walking into a room as a guest, I wouldn't say a damn thing. I would not. If I was just there for one, if somebody asked me a question directly, then it's okay to answer it. But like, if you're there as like somebody's guest, or you're just there for one episode, you let the people that are there to do the job do the job. But you will learn as you kind of move through various situations. There are certain people who are very open to hearing it, and then there are others who are not, and it's generally pretty clear. But if it's something really important, like if it's something technical, I think you can say it. Like, if you hear a tick, or if you hear a mistake, a very clear mistake of some sort, I do think then that's okay. People always want to catch those things. But a really good thing to do is, like Thomas was mentioning earlier, like, find the music editor. If it's a music thing, find the music editor and pull that person aside and kind of talk to them offline, and then that person can filter it through. Or you find the person like me, who's kind of running the stage, and then people have done that to me. Many times people will give me a few little notes, and then I'll work them in as we're going through.
There are showrunners in this town. Executives will come in from the studios or the networks or whatnot, and they'll have notes. And then they'll leave, and the showrunner will take the notes and throw them away. and it happens all the time. Yeah. They'll look at them and they'll say, you know what, it's my show. I've made my decision. I'm moving on. Yeah. So that you have to know the dynamic of when you walk in the room, of where they kind of stand. So it's cool.
I was just curious, is there a certain amount of prep work or pre-production offline that you do before you go into a dub stage in order to facilitate what you do? Or do you leave some, like you were saying, some wiggle room to go down some of those rabbit holes?
Yes.
What's the balance?
That's what's great about this team is on the sound effects side, and not to speak for the music side, because like I said, they kind of touched on it earlier, where there might be 5 choices. They'll hone it into where they might be down to the choice, or maybe they'll have 1 or 2 choices there, but Jason knows what that is. Same thing happens on the sound effects and the dialogue side. In order to get it done in this time frame, because it is so short, you're not going to have a lot of time for that much experimentation. So you want to make choices. That's really my job, is to listen to the sound effects and make those choices before I get there. A lot of it is also pre-mixing. I'll do a lot of pre-mixing in my studio before I get there, so that it's manageable. Because my elements, like the episode that these guys are nominated for, we were probably on the sound effects 300, 400 tracks of sound effects to get through in a day and a half. I have to make a lot of decisions before that. So yeah, that definitely happens. But then there is, there's going to places where you're going to.
But I'll also say we will sometimes too, if it's like an ADR performance issue, right? Where we have somebody wants to change a performance or it's a loop group thing where maybe we have like commercials on television or something like that. And then we will get those tracks sent to us ahead of time and we'll make performance selections ahead of time just because that helps us on the day. But as far as Larry and Kevin go, pretty much the extent of their preparation is they get to watch the episode
They see it.
like a couple of days before they mix it. I mean, that's how it works. They're on the other days that they're not with us, they're mixing other shows.
So imagine 400 tracks walking in. Like Larry has a lot of tracks, but Kevin gets the bulk of it. But so imagine he has 400 tracks he's got to look through in a day and a half. So I've got to have it organized. I've got to be able to sit there and go, here's the backgrounds, this is how we're going to do it. So there's a lot of prep that I have to do that. But their job, I just think about even opening that session for that day, going, okay, this is what I'm up against today. It's a real challenge.
But you also have to do that without tying your hands too.
Absolutely, yeah. You can't
organize it in a way that they can unravel if they want to make it.
That's the beauty of the digital world now, is that we don't do that as much. One question.
So when you're done, do you archive a whole resettable mix that in theory could be opened up in 30 years, or do you do a few stems? How do you do it?
Yeah, both. Yeah.
Sorry, guys, I've been given the wrap-up signal. I know you guys have other things to go to. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.